I'm talking to economists Betsey Stevenson and Justin Wolfers of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Their study, The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness, made headlines, to say the least, that women have become steadily unhappier since 1972. It also happens to be a launching pad for Marcus Buckingham's latest book, Find Your Strongest Life, What the Happiest and Most Successful Women Do Differently. They also are married and have a baby, as you can see. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
It's a pleasure, Shira.
So tell me, the study, it came out in a way 2 years ago, but now it's really, come to the forefront and people are talking about it.
Right. So we have been working on this paper for a couple of years. It came out 2 years ago as a working paper, and it's now gone through the scientific process of being peer-reviewed and been published in a peer-reviewed journal.
So what was the inspiration behind working on this?
It's at the intersection of two of our research agendas. We've been working a lot trying to understand happiness and the economic determinants of happiness. And Betsy in particular, but I think jointly we've also got a real interest in understanding gender and how gender plays out in economics. Put the two together and you get a topic like what's happening to happiness by gender.
So we're...
One of the things that we've worked on is the fact that happiness is typically greater happiness is typically associated with greater income. People always point to the United States as evidence that that's not the case. The U.S. hasn't gotten any happier over the last 3 decades, despite getting richer. And what we found is that that's even more puzzling than that, which is that it's women who've become less happy. Men have actually become slightly happier.
But where did you see the statistics, I guess? Like, what made you come up with these findings?
So we're both number crunchers by trade. And so what we're looking at is large-scale surveys that have been in the field every year for the last 30, 40 years. We spent a lot of our day actually just crunching numbers. And one of the things we noticed as we were actually working on another project was this very striking decline in what had happened to women's happiness in a particular data set. That then led us to go out and look for every other data set we could find that mapped what had happened to happiness over the past 30 years. And every time we looked, whether in the United States or overseas, whether for adults or for high school kids, we kept seeing the same pattern. We thought, given the tremendous strides made by the women's movement over the past 40 years, this is a particularly unexpected finding.
So what was the most surprising thing that you discovered in doing this study?
Really just how ubiquitous this trend is, that women have become less happy relative to men, whether we're looking at old women or young women or married women or single women, women who work in the market versus women who stay home, women in Portugal versus women in the Netherlands. This trend of women becoming less happy relative to men is very similar, both that it's occurring and in similar magnitude around the world.
So who is to blame for this?
We don't know. I mean, this is one of the things that the finding is simply that self-reported happiness has fallen for women relative to men. It could be that the way we're reporting our happiness on these surveys is changing. Betty Friedan certainly urged women to be more honest about their feelings. It became potentially, more acceptable to air one's dirty laundry in public and admit how you feel. There's a whole bunch of other theories. It could be that women today, when they're asked how happy they are comparing themselves to the man in the corner office who has the job that they should have rather than the equally lonely housewife next door. I know you've got other theories, Betsy.
Right. So, women's expectations might have just risen faster than the social reality was able to keep up with those expectations. And that gap between expectations and the reality could be leading to this.
And, the women's movement is not the only thing that happened over the past 40 years. It could be there are other things that happened in our society or in our economy that somehow had a bigger negative impact on women, but not as big of an impact on men. We don't quite know what that is, but I'm sure that you could probably think of a half a dozen explanations like that.
Right. We can think about what are the types of changes that have happened in the world over the last 3 decades, and particularly, thinking about the types of changes that might have impacted people in Europe and people in the U.S.
Yeah.
And they might have impacted both men and women, but that doesn't mean men and women need to react to the exact same event in the same way. We might be learning about women's differential feelings about certain phenomenon, be it, say, changes in global risk, changes in environmental policy, healthcare, any of these things. Men and women might just be responding differently.